Mary, could you check the front door just to make sure no one else is waiting out there? Thanks. All right, we'll get going. Welcome everybody. My name is Rick Rowe. I've been teaching this class at Acton, Boxboro, I think for about 25 years. I started, through the Middlesex County Beekeepers Association, which I was president of. There was a guy running the class. His name was Chris Trainer. He's from Acton. And I asked him if he'd like a little bit of help. I'd be happy to help him with the class, and here I am taking it. I took it over that year, and I've been here for 25 years. So this is kind of typical, about 35 people or so that register. We've had as many as 50 people in the class, so beekeeping has become very, very popular in not only just our area, but across the country. A lot of people are concerned about the environment, want to help the environment. A lot of people like to be outside, work in their gardens, so beekeeping kind of plays into it. But now that the more beekeepers that we have, the more people see it, and then it piques their interest. How many people here actually have bees now? If I get a show of hands. Okay. Okay, at work. Okay, and now, yeah. And so, okay. So what we do in this class is we teach you all about the bees and how to keep them healthy. We'll take you right through everything from how the bees interact with each other, how their development cycle is, how their life cycle is, and how to produce honey, where to place your bees. All those questions we'll be able to answer for you. I started keeping bees probably about 27 years ago. I had an experience when I was young. My uncle dressed me up and took me out to his bees at my grandfather's house. And that was probably when I was about 12 years old, and then 20 years went by. It was my only experience, but I never forgot it. I can remember it, to this day. I asked my uncle if he'd like to put some bees at my house in Boxboro. His bees had all got wiped out because it was a time where the bees had been infestated with parasites, and they killed all his bees. So I got into it, he got back into it, and I started with one hive, and today our company, my company, we run over 1,000 bee colonies. So I kind of started as a hobby beekeeper back in 2006. I decided to set up a company that would sell bees and beekeeping supplies and a little bit of honey. And so I started that out of my home, worked that out of my home for a dozen years or so, and then it'll be 3 years in April 1st that we moved into the building here that you see in Boxboro. We moved in there, we built the building and moved our operation over there. Let me see. So, I just misplaced, or did I? Hold on 1 minute, I gotta find my remote so I can move these slides over for you. Did I leave? Oh, there it is. Dropped it on the floor. Thank you. Okay, so here's our building. And this building, when we started the company, we were New England Beekeeping Supplies. A few years later, a friend of mine who had Carlisle honey, I had a different honey name for my honey, said that he was retiring, moving to Florida, so I bought his business of Carlisle honey and changed my customers to Carlisle honey, which we've been now for over 12 years. When we built the building, one of my passions and little hobbies was to make mead. It's a honey wine. It's made from honey and water, and sometimes you can add fruit. But I had been doing that at my home, and so I decided that we would apply for a farm winery license, and we started doing that as well. So we sell bees, beekeeping supplies. Obviously, we teach beekeeping. That's what we're doing here today. And so we've probably put a couple of thousand beekeepers out that I've taught. I also teach a class in Tingsboro. I have taught classes in Lincoln and kind of, throughout the whole area. So we've put a lot of beekeepers out there. Last year, we supplied bees to over 3,000 beekeepers, all in the New England area. So been doing it for a little while and enjoy. This is kind of one of our small yards here. This is in Lakeville. It's there's cranberry bogs that you can see out here in the back, and they also face the front of that. So in beekeeping, beekeeping is you have commercial beekeepers, and those commercial beekeepers will either pollinate, or they'll produce honey, or they'll produce bees for sale. And then underneath that, you have people that have like a little part-time business. So they might have 10, 20, maybe even up to 100 hives, and they're earning a part-time pay with those hives. And then you have just your hobby beekeepers who want to keep a couple of hives in their yard and maybe produce a little honey for themselves. So those are the three different types of beekeepers they are. And now we'll start talking about the bees, and this whole class will be about these three bees here: the worker, the queen, and the drone. And we're going to talk about what they do, how they develop, and how they all interact with themselves, and how this is the basis of all beekeeping. Without these bees, if you take one out of the equation, the whole colony fails. Honeybees are social insects. They depend on each other. We'll talk about the importance of each one. Now, if at any time, if anybody has any questions, please just raise your hand. We love questions. Helps the class go. If you have the questions, somebody else will probably thinking the same thing. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. And I will tell you one more time, the restrooms, if you go through this hall and take a left up the stairs, it's in the front lobby. You'll see the restrooms off to your right-hand side by the front door. If there's enough parking back here, this is the door we'll use. So, but we'll keep an eye on that front door. I don't know if it's unlocked all the time, but if this is a door we'll use to come in and out. Okay, so here's our three bees: worker bees, queen bee, and a drone. The drone is your male. The queen is your female. The workers are all female. Okay, right now in bee colonies that are sitting out there in the yard, there are no drones. They do not bring drones through the winter time in New England. They kind of boot them out. And so the hives right now are made up of, all worker bees and usually one queen. But we'll get into that as well. Okay. Workers make up the majority of the pollination. Even when there are drones in the summertime, they only make up maybe 5% of the population. Populations in a beehive will vary between maybe 10 10,000 bees in a colony up to 75 to 100. But the average colony is probably about 70,000 bees in the middle of the summertime. And their population goes up and down. So as they go through the winter, they have a lower population. As springtime comes, the queen starts laying eggs and the population starts to increase. And then it'll peak out probably sometime in August. Okay, so workers, again, they're 95% of the population, and they do all the work. The difference between a worker, a female worker, and a female queen is you could see the difference in their size, right? But the workers do not have full ovaries, so they cannot reproduce. So the queen, when she's in an egg stage, which we'll show you, she's fed differently. The egg itself is not different. It's laid from a queen. The queen lays all the eggs. But a queen bee can fertilize eggs because she stores sperm in her body from when she mates. So when she releases that sperm, it fertilizes the egg, and when she does that, it's a worker bee that comes out. All right, so workers, as they emerge from the minute they're born, they start doing different chores, and they can only live in the summertime up about 5 or 6 weeks on average. Depending on the conditions, they might live a little longer or a little less. But during that 5 or 6 weeks in the summertime, they're going to do different chores. And so she's going to clean out her cell that she came in for, so the queen will lay another egg in there. She will then feed the other eggs. Then she will be a wax producer. Then she'll be a forager until she dies. We'll get a little more into that. I just want to give you a brief thing right now. Drones. Drones are there for reproductive purposes. Yes?
Will that one bee actually experience all of the tasks that you just said, or are they programmed to do just one of them or the other?
Right. So the question is, those worker bees, all those chores that we just said, right? Are they going to do one of them or all of them? Has anybody seen that little cartoon, the Bee Movie? Right. Well, that's why I don't like that Bee Movie, because in the movie they say, oh, they're assigned one job. And no, they're not assigned one job. They do all the jobs. So they will, I'll show you in a couple other slides, but they will do one job, progress on to the next, progress on to the next. And we have a chart on that in a second. And again, drones, reproductive purposes only. However, the drones are not designed to mate with their own queen. They mate with queens from other hives. So how bees are mated is there's areas that the bees will fly to. So if you have a young queen, she is going to fly to an area where there's a lot of drones flying around. I'm not making this up. It's called a drone congregation area. And there was a lot of studies done. I'll talk about that a little later. But so they fly, the queens, when they first emerge, they build up their strength, they fly out and they mate, and then they fly back to the hive, then they can fly back again, and this can go on for a couple of days, even a couple of times a day, and for 2 or 3 consecutive days. Sometimes it might only happen once, but the queen is flying out to mate with these drones in open air, and she is looking to store sperm, and a variety of sperm, so that they can diversify their genetics, and then she will be mated once, during that small period of time for the rest of her life. And worker bees, we said, can live 5 to 6 years. When I started beekeeping, it was widely said that queens can live up to 5 years. You rarely, if ever, see that anymore. And I would say it was not common for queens to live for 5 years, but 3 years for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Now, conditions have changed even in this last 25 years that queens are probably living maybe 1 year. Hardly ever do they go through 2 seasons. We'll get into the reasons of why. The queen is the mother of all the bees in that hive. The bees will feed her, they'll clean her, she will give off pheromones. It's a little chemical smell. The bees do a lot, if almost everything, with smells. So her smell gets distributed throughout the whole hive, and the bees know that that is their queen. All right. And you can see here, typical, this is a nice picture. You can see the all the cells that the bees build. They shed the wax and they construct these cells. And this shape here, for you mathematicians in the group, is the strongest structure and can hold the most volume. And you can see how they tie it into it, but engineers will tell you that the honeycomb structure is the strongest structure that you can build. And so this queen here will back into these cells and lay an egg in the brood area. We'll talk about that. And these bees here, you can see how they're all facing the queen, and they're gathering her pheromones. They're distributing it throughout the hive. They are cleaning her and feeding her, and they are assessing her by how many eggs she lays. Yes?
Is that also how they can identify that a specific bee belongs to that hive?
Yes. So the bees themselves also carry those pheromones. So when bees fly in and out of a hive, there's some guard bees at the entrance, and they'll challenge the bees to make sure they belong to that hive. Yes?
So you mentioned that the drones will make the product more territorial. Like I've seen pictures that you have where the colonies are very kind of close together. Do they not?
Yeah, I'll tell you that, again, there's a study done by a Dave Tarpey, and he's from Massachusetts, and he's down at the University of North Carolina State. So what they did was they went around actually with balloons, and they had the pheromones, and they would go around looking for these drone congregation areas, and they would locate them. And in their study, they found that if you took all the bees out of this area, let's say a mile radius from this particular building, and you eliminated all the honeybee colonies, but before you did that, you located where the drone congregation areas were. Let's say there's 3 of them. If you eliminate all the bees and then wait 2 years and bring the bees back to this area, the congregation areas will go back to being the same. So it's not so much territorial, but there's something in the dynamics of the area that they're working that they're going to create this. They choose it for a reason. We don't always know. I love this in beekeeping. I've made it my living, and I've done it for a long time, and I'm very engaged. I go to a lot of conferences. Never be afraid in beekeeping to say you don't know. There's just certain things that you don't know. And I challenge people with that all the time. We'll talk about whether bees like foundation. See, this is foundation. You put a wax sheet in that has the imprint, and the bees build out the wax. And it can be plastic foundation, what we call inserts, or the whole frame can be plastic, or it can be wax. And you'll hear beekeepers say, well, the bees like the wax better. And I'm like, okay, and they told you that how? Because if all the conditions are right for the bees to make wax, they're gonna make wax on anything. You could put a stick in a hive and they're gonna draw wax down with no foundation. It might not be very manageable, but they will do that. So we don't always know. So why they pick out certain drone congregation areas, we can guess, but they are there. So as beekeepers, we identify areas that will be good for keeping bees. They will compete with other foragers. Honeybees are not native to the United States. We brought them here. Our colonists brought them here. But we've changed everything, so I don't know how relevant native is, because we have to grow food, and honeybees in themselves are responsible for 80% of all pollination. And they probably are the reason why we produce at least 1/3 of all the food that we eat. So, okay, so, yes?
You have too many bees in the area, over.
Yeah, you can. You can have too many bees. The honeybees will fly. The worker bee she can fly up to a mile away. So they're not going to just sit in your yard and work your yard, even if you have a nice garden planted, if you have some nice trees, you have some nice bushes that flower that the bees work. They're still going to expand because there's a lot of bees there. They'll do studies on pollination, on how many cranberries might require 3 hives per acre. Blueberries might require 5 hives per acre. But just because the honeybees do most of the pollination doesn't mean that there's not other beneficial pollinators out there. There is. And a lot of these pollinators work together. And some of the tighter flowers, a bumblebee will go in and open up that flower a little more to make it easier for the honeybee to get in there. So they can work as a team. Okay, so this here is one of the most important tables that we're going to look at. And what you're going to see is this is the development cycle. When I talk about an egg, this is an egg right here. Notice that it's dead center and it's standing up. It's not leaning over, it's not falling over, but in the first day, that's what it does. That egg stands up. The queen backs into that cell and she lays an egg. And it stays there for about the day. The second day it leans over. The third day it falls over, and then it'll start developing into the larva stage, and then into the pupa stage. So let's take a look back at that chart, and we'll show you a queen develops a lot faster. Oh, we're going to send you this slide, by the way. We'll email you this slide, so just in case you want to take a look at it, we'll have this available for you. So a queen develops in about 15.5 to 16 days. So that egg I just showed you, it's in the egg stage for 3 days. Then it goes into the larva stage for 5.5 days, and then the pupa stage for 7 to 7.5 days. I'll show you a picture of the pupa stage. That's when the final stage of development, and that the bees cap that cell over. So a worker bee, right, is again 3 days an egg, 6 days as a larva, and then 12 days, and then that bee emerges on the 21st day. Drones, a little bit slower, right? Guys were a little bit slower. 6.5, 14.5, 24 days to develop. Questions there? Yes.
So let's say something happens to the queen in the summer, she gets injured or hurt, or
Yes.
doesn't come back.
Yes.
How long do they wait before they start with a new queen?
Okay, so what happens when the queen, if something happens to the queen, we're going to get into that in 1 second. I'm going to hold off on answering that, but I'll be getting to that very shortly. Yeah, I'll get into that one. So this is just a different illustration here. So again, egg stage is pretty much the same, 3 days, and then you'll see a difference in the larva cycle. This is where the young bees are feeding the larva. So when I showed you that picture of the egg in the cell, what the young worker bees do is they eat a little bit of honey, they eat a little bit of pollen, they process that in their body, they excrete it out their antennas into the cells with the larva, creating a little pool of jelly. As beekeepers, we call it bee bread when they're feeding workers or drones, and we call it royal jelly when they're feeding the queen, because it is different. They process what they feed the queen in an enriched form of bee bread to what we call royal jelly, and that allows the queen, they construct a larger cell for her to develop with full ovaries and the ability to mate. Yes?
They choose which eggs are drone, worker, and queen bees?
The queen, if she fertilizes an egg,
Oh, that's right.
right? Yeah, if she fertilizes an egg, it will be it'll be a female. It'll be a worker or a queen, and so she's determining that. And I'll talk about the placement of those cells because it's very organized. So again, you can see in the chart, it's really important to know that a queen develops in 16 days or 15 and a half, a worker 21, and a drone 24. And then let's just talk about, again, jumping back to that worker bee, what she does in her lifetime. So when she emerges, for the first 2 days, she cleans out cells. She cleans up the cells and she keeps the brood warm. So we're calling the brood is the area where the eggs, larva, and pupa are, which is usually the center of the colony, the center of the frames, which we'll show you. But they have to keep that. That temperature around 95, 96. It'll give you the exact number in your book. But they have to incubate that and keep that warm. So these young bees will help do that. They cluster on those cells. They consume a little bit of honey. Honeybees are warm-blooded insects, so they have to stay warm. They'll freeze and die if they don't. So in order to create the warmth, they eat a little bit of honey and they vibrate their muscles and they produce heat. And when they cluster and cover the brood area, they can control the temperature for that developing eggs and larva and pupa. So then going back to the next 3, 4, 5, they're starting to feed older larvae with the honey and pollen. And then day 6 through day 11, they're feeding the younger the younger eggs and larvae, and they call it royal jelly. I like to distinguish the two. I call it bee bread, and again, what they feed the queen, royal jelly. There is a difference. And then after that, 12 to 17 days old, they are now again, they're consuming nectar and they're shedding wax glands, tiny wax particles off their stomach. It's like they shed them. And the other bees take that and they construct cells, they cap honey, they cap larvae with that beeswax. And then 18 to 21, they start looking at the entrance of the hive. They might fly out of the hive and circle around the front of the hive. They start to orientate themselves to the hive. And then from day 22 to 35, they are out there for 2 to 3 weeks, collecting pollen, collecting nectar, collecting propolis, collecting water, all the things, the resources they bring back into the hive. Questions? Got everybody? Yes? Propolis, so let me go right through this list. Pollen. Pollen is, I think everybody's familiar with pollen in a plant, right? There's the honeybee collecting pollen. And pollen to a honeybee is their protein. That's their protein source. Honey or nectar, which they will share with each other, right? So you can see these two bees kind of feeding each other. That is their carbohydrate source. And then you have the propolis. If you break a plant, it excretes a fluid, and different plants will have different properties, but mostly that fluid is antibacterial, antifungal, and they will, in some cases, antiviral. And they will coat the inside of, they'll coat the inside of the colony with that propolis, and that sterilizes the inside of the hive. Bees rely on a very clean environment inside the hive. It's very important to them. And then, of course, water, they, just like we have to consume water, they do too. And they also will use the water to control the temperature in the hive. So in the summertime, if it gets very, very hot, the bees are foraging for water, and they're bringing that in and circulating the air inside the hive, and then they are create a cooler environment. Sometimes they'll leave the inside of the hive and cluster on the outside because there's too many bees inside the colony, and they need to control, because that, when we talk about the larva and the eggs, and that needs to be maintained at that temperature. It can't get hotter than that, and it can't get cooler than that. They have to maintain a constant temperature in there. Okay. So, royal jelly or bee bread is, they're consuming a little pollen, they're consuming a little bit of honey, they're processing it in their body, adding enzymes to it. It's an enriched form of enzymes. They have the ability to control that. But they'll stick their head into these